Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be back. Sorry about the lateness, just technical issues as always. I'm really excited to be joined with all of these YA sci-fi fantasy sequels. This is such a joy to be able to reconnect and talk about these books, these characters all over again. Just a little bit about me. I'm the moderator for this panel. My name's Lily, and I'm kind of the face behind Utopia State of Mind. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'll try to remind you as well, and I'll try to remember to go back up in the chat. We are going to have the authors tell us about their books, and then we're going to go ahead with questions. Kate, do you want to start?
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Dillon. I'm the author of Mindwalker and the just released sequel, which is not really a sequel, it's a companion novel set in the same world called Mindbreaker.
Hi, I'm Rachel Menard. I'm the author of The Labors of Gen Duology, which is a gender-bent Hercules retelling. So the first book was Game of Strength and Storm, and the second book we'll be talking about today is Clash of Fate and Fury.
Hi, I'm Akshaya Raman. I'm the author of The Ivory Key, which is out in paperback in like 2 weeks. And then The Crimson Fortress, which comes out November 14th, which is the sequel to this duology.
Hi, I'm Emily Theed. I'm the author of This Vicious Grace, a romantic fantasy, and the sequel, This Cursed Light, that comes out on December 5th.
Hi, I'm Sonia Mara. I'm the author of The Darkening and The Light Struck, which came out 1 month ago, which is the sequel and conclusion to the duology.
Perfect. So the first question that I have is all on kind of taking on the sequel companion novel theme. So it's that, we have also a lot of series/story endings in this panel as well. And I wanted to know in general if you could all talk about how it was to finish certain character or story arcs or paths within your books. And I think also the idea, maybe chatting a little bit more also about the idea of a 2-book series, like duologies versus trilogies. I feel like when I was growing up, it was all like trilogies or, 10-book series. There was nothing smaller than 3 books and nothing between. So I'm really interested to hear about that from everyone. Akshay, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So my experience with this was actually a little bit weird because I initially envisioned it as a trilogy, and then when it actually came time to go out on sub with it, I decided to turn it into a duology, and I thought it's probably fine because I had most of book 2 figured out, and I didn't really know what the ending was going to be, but I was like, I think I can fit that all into one book. However, the structure of a trilogy versus a duology is so different. And I realized just taking 2 books and condensing them into one was causing a lot of problems because it was basically the whole arc, and it was coming down to a conclusion in the middle of the book, and then I was starting a whole new story essentially because combining it into one was not working structure wise. So it was actually a lot more challenging than I thought it was going to be to take all the ideas that I had and make them into one cohesive story where the action is just building all the way through and not just having this giant drop right in the middle. And working on it was definitely a figuring out that was the problem took so long. And I still was able to keep the midpoint kind of where I envisioned it to be, but doing that was probably the most challenging part, and that's what made it so much more different than working on book 1 where I really knew what the plot was going to be all the way through. So that was, I guess, kind of my experience of working on the sequel. I don't know if other people had planned their books more as a duology, and I think that would definitely help a lot.
I'll jump in because I did plan mine as a duology. So it's a gender-bent Hercules, and in the original Hercules is assigned 10 labors, and then when he finishes those, 2 were not done to the king's satisfaction, so he gets assigned 2 more. So I had structured mine from the beginning based on Jen does these 10 tasks and then gets assigned 2 more. So book 1 would be the first 10 labors, and book 2 would be the other 2 labors. But that being said, like, I had ideas and like concept for probably half of book 2 when we sold it, and I kind of just had to like fudge a synopsis for the rest to sell the duology. But a lot changed from that synopsis to the actual finished book.
I can jump in. I'm kind of in the middle of those two, actually. I wrote This Vicious Grace as a standalone originally. And when I had first sent it out, it was missing an ending. When I sent it out to critique partners and beta readers, it was missing an ending because I knew it couldn't just end perfectly happily, if that makes any sense. And I wasn't sure whether to go really dark or how to kind of salvage that. And Margie Fuston, who's also an author, came up with a brilliant plan where I could sort of kind of do both, that it would set up for a sequel. And so that is how I queried it. That's how we went on submission with it. So the plan at that point was for it to be a duology, but I hadn't really figured out all the ins and outs of what would happen in that sequel. And as other people have mentioned, then you have to kind of wing it and write a synopsis, because for a 2-book deal, they do want to know that you have a plan for the book. So even if you don't, you have to sort of fake it until you make it. But then because it sold as a duology and I still had 2.5 years before book 1 came out, I had time to sort of go back and revise the first book to really support what I then decided to do with the sequel. And I ended up getting sort of, in some ways, like, I'm neurodiverse. I don't know if this is just the ADHD thing, but I got really fixated on making them thematically and in a lot of other ways in terms of pacing to sort of be mirror images of each other. I wanted as many callbacks as possible. I wanted it to almost feel like you were opening up 2 halves of the same story in the ways that I reflected the themes. But the biggest challenge for me, I think, was that This Vicious Grace is very, very romantic. And there's a reason why romance novels don't have sequels. Because it's hard to have a satisfying romantic arc and then start again. And so there tends to be this default, like, we'll just break them up. And I didn't want to do that, but no spoilers. For people who have read the first book, I did throw quite a wrench in their relationship. And then in the sequel, I had to sort of figure out how to recreate all the feelings that I wanted readers to have without having a couple that was meeting for the first time. And that was really challenging, but I'm really proud of how it turned out in the end.
So I'll jump in that I am also a standalone, and part of the reason for that is it wasn't really planned. I never really plan anything, which is not great strategically. If you want to be a career author, you really should put some thought into what you're doing. But I just jumped in, and I was just like, okay, I'm doing this. And the thing you really learn very, very fast when you are writing YA sci-fi is to never assume they're going to let you write YA sci-fi. So trying to make this a duo or a trilogy would have pretty much guaranteed that the book wouldn't sell. So I think I'd sort of internalized that as I was writing. And so naturally, the book kind of became a standalone, because selling 1 is hard, selling 2 is harder. So I was just like, okay, we're going to do this one at a time, and then we're going to see how things go. But the flip side of that is I really like writing standalones, because I found that especially since the pandemic, my attention span is not what it used to be. It's really, really hard for me to pick up the second books in series, trilogies as well. So it's just like, I really wanted to get to the end of the book and just have a reader be like, I can put this down. I am done now. And I can come back to the world, and there is a companion novel. It does pick up on a few of the characters from the first book. I won't say which ones because it will spoil the first book, but you also don't have to have read that book. You don't need to read book 2. I mean, I think you should, because I think it's pretty great, but you don't have to. Book 1 ends with a satisfying ending, and you can read book 2 without having read book 1. The full experience is 2 books together, but they're not dependent on each other. And yeah, I was really pleased that they agreed to let me do the second one, and that is also a standalone, as is the new thing I'm working on. So I think my attention span has just been like, you know what? You can write 100,000 words and be done. Wouldn't that be nice?
I'm also kind of in the boat of, I wrote 1 book and I had these ideas for character arcs and how they would end in like beautiful and explosive ways. And I did that. And it was kind of like, without really thinking about it, we sold the book as a 2-book series. And when I finished the first book and sent it off to the printers, and then I was like, okay, here are all my ideas for it. But I think like the challenge of it, but also the fun of it, was figuring out, I've given these characters a life and kind of had them deal with terrible things and come out as new people. But these new people are kind of like, they have less problems. So how do I bring them into this new world and give them like interesting things to deal with, to take them through a whole nother book and adventure? So I think like I really, like Emily was saying, like I was thinking about vinyl records and having an A side and a B side, and how it's like they are mirrors of each other, but you can also explore thematically. If the first book was people dealing with their fears, and the second one can be about what they want to reach for, like their desires and hopes. So I wouldn't say it was easy. That was the first sequel I ever wrote, and my next book is a standalone, so I think I needed some space from sequels. But yeah, I think it was kind of fun.
Yeah, I love that idea of like where they're going next, right? What new problem are you going to give them to kind of up the stakes? That's kind of something, as Emily was saying, that's like my segue basically to the next question for this cursed light, and finding out kind of where relationships, where stories are going. So I want to ask both about this cursed light and Clash of Fate and Fury, because I think both of your books also are exploring dangerous power within the scope of relationships, not only romantic relationships, friendships, family, etc. And how you can have dangerous powers, and how does that affect how you see the people around you. So I'm wondering if you both could talk about how it was to explore your characters' powers, identity, and also self-confidence as they navigate their selves as well as their partner. And how did you approach the story or character of their partner in relation to that? So do you want to go first, Emily? Because I feel like you kind of teased it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the big thing for me, again, with a duology was that I wanted both books to feel kind of equally weighty in terms of the themes that I was exploring. I wanted to expand the world, and I wanted to also start something new. So what I did was to introduce a new point of view character. I won't say who it is, but if you've read the first one, I'm sure you can figure out who it is. Um, because I wanted to make sure that I had the space to explore those themes thoroughly again. Because I did write this Vicious Grace in order to, I wanted it to feel very complete and very satisfying. And so I wasn't looking into these themes with Alessa's story about what it means to be disconnected from other people, what it means to be connected, relationships in general. And so for her, a big part of her story arc is all about kind of learning to stand on her own feet, but also learning to like herself and forgive herself for things in order to build relationships with other people. And in the sequel, this other point of view character is sort of learning the flip side of that, which is all about when you do connect with people, when you do let yourself have relationships, that comes with danger. Loving people is a terrifying thing because you can lose them, because you can get hurt. And so in book one, I have this main character who is just desperate for connection, and yet when she gets too close to people or physically touches them, she risks their lives. And in book two, it's really more about the emotional dangers of getting in relationships and the fear that comes with that. And so it was really fun and challenging to explore sort of the same theme from opposite perspectives, where you have one book where someone desperately wants connection but is physically denied it, and you have a second book where someone is perfectly physically capable of human connection but is sort of emotionally struggling with it. And pairing those together and seeing how both of those characters can emerge at the end of it with a different understanding of the the pros and cons of human connection, the joys and the fears at the same time.
So I said that I wrote it based off the original Hercules. So in the first book, there's a lot of action because there were 10 labors, like 10 major activities that the characters were going through. So in book 2, we only had like the 2 major labors to complete. So I did focus a lot more on the relationships between the characters. In book 1, the story of Hercules is like becoming a hero. So in book 1, Jen is the reluctant hero, but then after completing like some pretty near impossible tasks in book 1, she starts to have this confidence. And sometimes it's an overconfidence that can get her into trouble now. She's kind of flipped. So I have 3 POV characters in my book. So Castor's the other female character, and she and Jen are each other's antagonists. But they both have something similar in that they're chasing after either a professional or a personal goal, and it's to the point of obsession. And so I think for book 2, it's like the longer they have to chase after it, the longer they fail, the more obsessed they get with it, and they start like forgetting and ignoring everything else around them, and people get hurt. And so the evolution of that is realizing like what they had, what this obsession has cost them, and maybe things like might not work out the way they wanted. And so they both kind of have to accept that.
Moving on to the Crimson Fortress and the Lightstruck, I felt like in the sequels, all your I wrote your characters, but I feel like everyone in both of your sequels aren't sure who to trust, and if they're making mistakes in who they trust, especially who they used to trust, can they trust them again? So I'd love for you to both answer, how did you approach the pacing and the reveals of those betrayals, like the interpersonal sabotage, I guess, between your characters? And for example, also in the Lightstruck, there's that huge time jump between the Lightstruck and the Darkening, and I thought that was really interesting to see how so much has changed in between that. And also in the Crimson Fortress, a lot of loyalty is like, it's kind of like quicksand. Like a lot of loyalty is consistently changing and shifting within the books. So I'd love to know for both of you, how you paced those kinds of reveals. Sonia, do you want to start?
Sure. So for me, the 3-year gap was to kind of give time for not only characters to grow and to have new challenges and to rediscover each other, but for the new villain to have enough time to cause an appropriate amount of havoc. And that was, I guess, like there's this old, I think it was Elmore Leonard, who said when you're starting a book from the first page, like to think of those wind up like punch toys like in cartoons, and like from page 1, like that should be wound all the way back. So if I started like the second after the Darkening ended, then a lot was like there wasn't enough to push through a whole new book. So that was that reason. And as for the reveals of like, how did I figure that out? I mean, a lot of it is emotional and a little bit relying on like gut instinct of, I'm having like 2 opposing thoughts. And one is about the cycle of reversals. Like you want someone to feel like they know, like Vesper, my main character, to feel like she knows what's going on, and then to have that turned and twisted. So she has to come to terms with it and figure out what to do and kind of weave those through in a way that grows and takes you to the end. So, yeah, I mean, I can talk to you about like the ends of acts and those little arcs, but it was mostly just following the character and what she needed to be going through.
Yeah, we can't hear you, or I can't hear Akshay. I'm not sure if everyone else can. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was me. Okay. I'll move on, but then hopefully we can fix that and we can go back to your answer. Um, hold on, I have to go back to my notes. Okay, so Kate, I want to talk to you. You also talked about like how this is a companion novel, not a straight up kind of sequel. So I wanted to know from you specifically how you approached your main characters and the differentiation between them. Um, and also like how in this companion novel you get to pull and develop the world that you started in the first, and you know how you develop and what you wanted to see from that.
Sure thing. So like I said, there was no real plan for a second book until suddenly there was. The stage at which that happened was when I was querying, I got an agent, which was great. And I think we were both really very enthusiastic about how quickly we would sell this book. Because I think my agent is fantastic agent, but I think I was her first like I say hard sci-fi because that is what we have been called because it is a cyberpunk, which is one of the harder. It's one of the things that editors react to and just assume that it's hard sci-fi, even when it's not. So I will say it's not. There is basically 0.5% science in the book, and 0.4% of that is probably factually incorrect. So it's definitely not hard sci-fi, but that is what it was seen as. So it took us much, much longer to sell than we expected. And so in my head, if it sold, it was going to be one book and that would be it. Nobody was ever going to let me write a second one. So suddenly I had to write a second one. And, your agent says, hey, do you want to write, a quick chapter and a synopsis? And you're like, yeah, let me do this as quickly as possible. But also, I must get an A at this. But I want to be fast. So I spent no time thinking about it. And I did a concept chapter. And her notes on that were, this is great, but you've essentially written the same book again. Because originally Indra was not part of a religious anti-tech cult. Indra was actually the daughter of a tech mogul. She still gets turned into a robot against her will, but essentially, my agent Andrea was just like, you've written about a girl who's into tech, who something happens to her and she has to run away from her company and find out the truth. And then you just did that again. And I was just like, oh, when you put it that way, it does sound like I kind of wrote the exact same book. So at that point, I had to take a step back and stop being like, okay, let me write this as fast as possible so my agent doesn't think I'm lazy. And I was just like, okay, if I want to explore this world, how am I going to do it? And that's the point at which I was just like, well, if Syl, in the main book, she's a mind walker, she literally has a computer in her brain, she's pretty much as pro-tech as they come. I was just like, it would be really interesting to approach this world, which is saturated with technology, from the point of someone who hates tech or is supposed to hate tech. And there's like, I think when I wrote it, it was like this totally throwaway line in book one, which was, about the fringe cults that are anti-tech and everybody makes fun of them. And suddenly I was just like, what if I write a book about the girl from the fringe cult that everybody makes fun of? And what if she turns into a robot? And that's pretty much where that idea for the companion novel came in. It had the benefit of also being as indirect a sequel as possible. So I think a lot of companion novels tend to follow a character from book one as the main character, which is a lot of fun to do. But I was just like, why don't I make life harder for myself and go somebody completely new, have to introduce the world from a completely different viewpoint? And I was kicking myself a little for that one when I was doing the work, but it did turn out really, really great. Although differentiating Indra from Syl was quite difficult. I was lucky. I had finished my first draft by the time book one came out, which I highly recommend for anyone who can swing it to do, because once those reviews start coming in, it really messes with your head. And one of the things that people were really responding to well about the first book was Syl. People loved Syl. They loved being in her head. They loved the stuff she was doing. They loved how confident she was. And then at the same time, I am sitting on a note from my editor that says, hey, we need to make Indra different. We need to make her the opposite of Syl. And my brain is just like, but Syl is what people like. Like, if I make her different, how are people going to like her? So it took a lot of work to really be like, okay, Indra has to be different. I can't be writing the same book. but how do we make naivety, how do we make obliviousness, how do we make never being able to make a good decision fun? And I think that was the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the reviews and like this, the timeline of publishing, which will lead me to my next question. By the way, if anyone has any questions, please throw them in the chat. My next question is about that, and it's about how are your expectations similar or different to the sequel's release, lead up, promotion, like the whole process for this sequel versus the first book? So Kate, do you want to start? Because I feel like that was kind of what the tail end of what you were saying.
Sure. So, believe it or not, somewhere between book 1 and book 2, I found some chill. Like, there is just when you're a debut, everything is so big, everything matters. You're 9 months out and you're like, "I haven't started shouting about this book yet, my book is going to fail," and everyone is telling you that 9 months out is too early and nobody's gonna pre-order a book by debut 9 months out, but you're like, "I'm gonna make 700 TikToks a day anyway," and it's exhausting. Um, and I think it wasn't up until release that I actually found out how little of that stuff matters. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm not saying it doesn't help. Like, I think also, you know, sometimes there are, and I'm looking at you directly, Sonia, because your TikToks are absolutely incredible. Like, sometimes it really can change the propulsion of a book, but I think for most authors, the reality is the stuff that I found hindered my book was stuff I could not see coming. And the stuff that really helped it was also stuff I couldn't see coming and was out of my control. So, yeah. So by the time it came to book 2, I was just like, look, I'm going to do these things. Like, I have graphic templates. I'm going to do them. I'm on TikTok now. I'm going to do that. But I'm not going to launch a pre order campaign 4 months out. I'm going to do it a month out. And I'm not going to make a ton of videos to a book that nobody can buy yet. So it was a gentler experience, I would say, because I'd sort of had the trial by fire where I was just like, I'm doing all these things, and yet these things I couldn't plan for are the ones that really matter. So now I was just like, just gonna chill a little. Also, I was exhausted and under contract for a different book, so that really helped.
I'll say that Kate actually brought up something that I think is it's hard to talk about the debut experience because a lot of us, all of us, are so on edge. It gets to the point where people sharing bad news stresses people out, and people sharing good news stresses people out, and like there's nothing that's safe to talk about by the end of debut year. But Kate specifically mentioned reader reviews, and I think I went into writing the sequel thinking, oh, I should try to get it done before my first book comes out, because if people don't like it, that's going to make it really hard for me to write the second book. And I got the very wonderful dilemma of people really did like it, which it turns out that messes with your head just as much in a different way. It's different. I mean, I'd still rather have that than the other option, but there is something about when you suddenly have a group of people that is really excited about your book and they like what you did, and now suddenly you're terrified of letting them down or of not delivering what they think you're going to deliver. So that, and I did not follow Kate's advice. I tried to, but pandemic kind of threw me off in terms of like finishing the sequel. So I was dragging myself through drafting the sequel while my debut was coming out. And again, it's such a wonderful problem to have, but getting tagged on social media every day by people saying, I love this book, I can't wait for the sequel. My brain heard, don't mess it up. And also, you're being too slow. So there was a lot of stress that came with that. And I also tend to be very difficult on myself, hard on myself. I was really proud of This Vicious Grace, and I really wanted the sequel to live up to it. So in terms of expectations, I think the hardest part really was about that, finding the balance between trying to deliver what people want and making sure that you're doing what you know is right for the book, because that will then hopefully be what readers want, even if they don't know it from the start. And in terms of expectations, it's kind of wild with a debut, because what you're doing is you're hoping a lot of people will show up and buy a book based on nothing but either word of mouth, buzz, the stars aligning. You have no idea what it's going to be, but they're taking a leap of faith on a book that they have no idea if they're going to like it. And so in some ways, sequels are easier in that, like, okay, well, now you have shown people what you can do. So you're just trying to remind them, like, hey, remember this thing you liked? There's another one, please come back. But at the same time, you have a smaller audience, because just mathematically people aren't going to buy a sequel if they haven't read the first book. So in terms of marketing, I hear you, Kate, when it comes to the social media thing, because I had to kind of switch my mindset from, if I try to go viral on TikTok, people will know my book exists, and switching it over now to, all right, I know the readers are there. I hear that they enjoyed this book. At this point, my job is not to convince them to read the sequel, because hopefully book one did that. My job is just to remind them that it's coming out, because especially those early week sales can be hugely important. And for a lot of us who might be in the process of getting ready to try and sell other books, we really just want the readers who said they want the sequel to know that it's coming out, so that they can show up and pick it up when it does. So yeah, it's really more about just connecting with the people that are already enthusiastic and letting them know that you're still there in the midst of all the chaos of the world.
Yeah, I think for me is a similar experience of, I think with the debut, part of it for me was just I didn't have any experience to rely on. Everything is brand new. Like every email from your editor has like a new stage you've never gone through before. So it's all kind of just like, the unknown. And with the light struck, I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen. And that did give me a lot of chill. And I also, I think like, I finished writing The Light Struck, sent it off, and then I thought about, oh, maybe I should, do something on social media, because I had been avoiding it for the first year. And that was just a little bit of like, my editor told me social media doesn't move the needle. So it was with no expectation of doing anything that I just kind of jumped on and said, I'm going to amuse myself. And then some of those did pretty well. So, which did help book sales, which I know is unusual. But I think that actually made me just like chill out all the way. It's like, okay, I don't know anything. Like, I'm just going to, throw books in a blender, and some people are going to enjoy it. And I'm going to write The Light Struck, and it's going to be everything I want to figure out from the story and these characters and how I want to send them off into the sunset. And people are going to like it, or people won't. And I think the reviews of, oh my gosh, hold on one second. I have no idea what's happening. But the reviews of The Darkening were, some people really liked it, and some people were like, this isn't really for me, and it's confusing. And there wasn't a whole lot kind of in the middle. And I was like, that frees me too, because that just means that my book is reaching more people than maybe it's written for or can really move, which is a good thing. That means like publishers, marketing team, and everything's working. And so then I was a little bit more freed with the sequel. Like, if the people who love The Darkening are the ones who are going to pick it up, then I'm writing for the people who, I guess, my style of work is for. So I think that all that together did kind of just like, all you can do is the best that you can do and have fun. And none of us are in this career because we want to be miserable. It's because we like writing. So I decided I'm not going to make myself miserable. And that's been working for me.
Yeah, like everyone else, I definitely got some chill between book one and book two. I definitely went like full force marketing for book one, and got a good experience of what worked and what didn't. So I was able to cut a lot for book two. And I think we all know that sequels usually don't perform as well as the original. So like Emily said, it was about like letting people who had read the first book know that the series is complete if you want to finish it. Going forward, I'm just still trying to like reach readers for the duology as a whole. I definitely had some fears, like Emily said, about, because I think a lot of us, when you're trying to get published, you do end up writing up one manuscript, and everyone says don't work on a sequel to that manuscript, because if it doesn't sell, you're going to have to like write something new. So this was like the first time I had readers like expecting something from characters and from, my writing in a second book. So like Emily, I was really worried about disappointing them. I'm in contact with a couple of readers that really like book one. So I actually did ask them like, oh, I know you really like this character. What would you like her to do in book two? And I did actually have planned what she wanted. So I was like, okay, good. Like, at least you're like one of my favorite readers and I won't disappoint you. So that was good. And then, yeah, I think like the best thing is I noticed some early ARC reviewers of book two didn't even know it was a sequel and really liked it on its own. And so I was like pretty proud of myself for that being my first sequel, that I gave enough backstory that it was understandable to someone who hadn't read the first book.
I want to give a quick shout out to my publisher because they did the most brilliant thing ever, which is when they sent out, when they did a giveaway for advanced reader copies of my sequel, they sent out book one with it to make sure, because especially on Goodreads, people will just sign up for a giveaway not knowing it's a sequel. And I would say that, unlike Rachel, please don't read my sequel without reading the first one. Like, read the first, you can buy them both now, but please read the first one. And I just thought that was really smart to make sure that people know that, it is book two, because I think that can be kind of a wrench in the works of marketing a sequel. Because I'm sure a lot of us know that, like, when you're marketing a sequel, what you're often really doing is still marketing the first one, because every person who buys the first book will hopefully then fall in love with it and want to read the second one. It's very hard to market a second book because, again, you want the first book to have been the thing that makes people want to read the second one, and it's complicated. But yeah, thanks to my publisher for that.
Yeah, that was actually something I'd wanted to say as well, right? It becomes sort of finding readers who've definitely liked your first one and who are, you're writing the sequel to help them and like to appeal, to entertain them. But also then it also switches into gear of trying to look at it together, right? And trying to say here, but for new readers, this is why you should read both book one and book two that just released. I have a final question for everyone, and this is one I've been asking recently that I'm obsessed with. But it's, who is an author who always inspires you? And this question was inspired by me watching a TikTok that was asking like, who is Beyonce's Beyonce? So now I like to ask everyone on the panel, like, who's your Beyonce? Like, who's your Beyonce author, basically? Kate, do you want to start?
Sure. Sure. Oh, there I am. So I'm a bit of a weird one. I think the authors and this is not in any way meant to be sort of any shade. It's mostly to do with the structural way the publishing industry works. But I think the authors that I look up to most are the ones who didn't necessarily break out early in their career. So I think V. Schwab comes to mind, which is, she didn't have a big debut. And then she had a series and it got canceled halfway through. And she did work for hire. And then, she did a quirky little book. One of my favorites is Vicious. And it did well, but it didn't set the world on fire. And then suddenly, the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy happened, and that is when things started to take off. And it's, you look at her success now and it kind of feels like, well, she's obviously just a massive author. She's always been massive. And the truth is, she wasn't always massive. And it's incredibly hard to, for example, when you are not the big buzzy debut, it's incredibly hard to compete with the big buzzy debuts, because the industry is kind of set up that way. You either are or you aren't. And writing through that is something that most authors, even the big buzzy debuts, will eventually have to work through a patch where either things aren't going as fast or aren't going as well, or a book hit but not quite as well as they expected. Like, it doesn't matter what entry level you come into to the industry, at some point something is going to go wrong. And I think the most inspirational thing for me is to watch the people who have had it go wrong and we're just like, out of spite, we're just like, I'm not quitting though. Like, you're stuck with me and I'm going to prove that you're all wrong. And of course, even those examples aren't perfect, because for every V. Schwab, there is probably a writer who is, 5, 6, 7 books in and it hasn't taken off, because the reality of this business is it doesn't always. Not everybody breaks out big. You can count the number of household names on like, one hand. So it's not something that's achievable for everyone, but it's so inspirational to me to watch, to be like, you know what, it doesn't have to be all or nothing all the time. You can just be about the book, about the writing, and about just, keeping your head down, doing your work, hoping it gets better, hoping people like it. And you know what? If one day you wake up and you decide this isn't for me anymore, that's totally okay too.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's so many authors who have talked about this too. Like Bridget Kemmerer said, people still assume that A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I think, was her debut, just because like the other like million books she had written didn't break through in that same way. And I also and like Emily Henry, her first 3 YA books, which I was like, these are so delightful, magical realism. Like I adore them. And like the public did not respond in the exact same way as they have to, but they've come out massively for her in adult romance. And I also sometimes like I've started counting, like if someone just blows up and they're on the New York Times #1, all of these things, I'm like, what book was it of theirs? And I think like Fourth Wing was her 19th book or something. There is, when you can put in the work and build your own foundation and know yourself as a writer, then I think first you're more equipped for all those big moments, but also like I got into this work because I really like writing and because I really like reading. And the authors who are like my Beyonce are the ones who've moved me like deeply and said, consider that there can be art in words, which everybody uses in day-to-day life. And Italo Calvino is probably my Beyonce. And I go back to his like Italian folktales or Invisible Cities often just to remember what words can do. And I think that helps me, like the business side, whenever I need a little reminder that it's a career, you're going to grow and it's a long-term thing. I have a lot of authors to look at. And then I have some authors that I just, when I need like a dose of poetry in my veins or something, that's who really helps me.
We have some kind of hive mind going on in this group because you guys took all my answers. Yes, my first thought was both professionally and artistically, Victoria Schwab and Emily Henry, for the same reasons that everyone mentioned, because they kept putting out good art and building their audiences bit by bit until they hit that crossover point where suddenly other people heard about it, and I think that's the thing too, is we often think of books as they either blow up or they don't blow up, and we kind of ignore the fact sometimes that those early books didn't disappear into the void. Each one of those earlier books built an audience. It gathered people who are going to start saying, you're an auto-buy author for me. And I don't know about everyone else, but I can assume we all agree that some of the greatest things you can hear from someone is if they've read your book and they say, I'll buy anything that you write in the future. It's like, oh, thank you. Because that gives us the freedom to explore new things. And so, Emily Henry wrote in different genres and I'm sure was gathering devoted readers the entire time until it kind of hit that tipping point where suddenly other people are hearing about a book. But also, Victoria Schwab and Emily Henry both are able and have now had the chance to write in different genres and subgenres to explore different age groups. And I think that is amazing, because if you can write the kind of work that makes readers willing to come with you on a journey to a different age range, to a different genre or subgenre, that is something really and truly special, which I think is wonderful. And I've also really enjoyed recently looking up books and trying to figure out kind of at what point in someone's career they really broke out. And there are so many stories like that that we just don't realize. Right now, I know everyone on the planet is reading Divine Rivals, and Rebecca Ross, that was not her first book. She'd written a couple other books over the past few years. And again, gathering that audience, finding the readers who are just, they're on the train and they're sticking with you on that train, and you're going to gather more people as you go. But yeah, I don't really have one person in particular, but again, with Victoria Schwab and Emily Henry, I love their prose. I love the fact that they are able to combine adventure and fun, and especially with Emily Henry, romance, but also with kind of darker, heavier topics that allow you to read a book and feel like you kind of got this little snapshot of an entire whole human experience. And that's something that I really strive to do in my work. So all the authors like that, and every author who keeps going even when it is challenging.
Yeah, not to copy everyone else, but I would say V.E. Schwab as well. But I had in my notes, just on a different twist, is a lot of authors I admire are authors who do things I can't. I'm always really impressed with Courtney Summers. Sadie was such an incredible book, and the way that she told it through this like podcast, and just focused on really dark themes is something that I would be kind of scared to go that dark. So I was impressed by that. And I recently read Heather Fawcett's The Encyclopedia of Fairies. And I'm always worried, like, if there's not a bunch of action happening, it's going to be boring. But she did like an incredible kind of cozy fantasy and told through journal, and had it happening and had it engaging without like explosions happening on screen. So I really like to study authors like that do different genres or different things, and like how can I incorporate some of that, or like skill myself up to be better at doing those things I'm not very good at. But again, like everyone else, yeah, the people that stick with it are always very inspiring.
Well, thank you all so much for chatting with us tonight. Thank you to everyone watching. Also, everyone's books are down below, and also Akshaya's book links are down below as well. So definitely please go pre-order, add them, do all of the wonderful things. I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. And yeah, happy reading for the rest of the year, I guess. Bye.